Namaste. Very warm welcome to all the people from various parts of the world joining us here today. This is a very special series for us because this is the finale session of our series Switzerland for Sustainability. And today we have a very special guest that is Swiss Development Corporation. This is the Agency for Development and Cooperation from Switzerland. And we have two special guests, Mr. Jonathan Demonge and Ms. Corinne Demonge. Mr. Jonathan is the head of cooperation at SDC, while Ms. Corinne is head of cooperation and counselor at the Embassy of Switzerland. So very warm welcome to both of you. I would also like to extend our very special welcome and gratitude to the Consul General Ottmar Heidegger for his extreme committed initiative in launching this series and also ensuring that all the Swiss companies are featured and we get to hear from them their sustainability vision and approach. And with this, I would request Mr. Heidegger to deliver his special remarks that would summarize this entire series, because today is the concluding session for us. Ottmar, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gayatri, for the introduction. And also from my side, ladies and gentlemen, I like to welcome you to this fifth and last section of this virtual series. And I'm very grateful that you are able to join. As mentioned, over the last 3 months, the Consulate General of Switzerland in Mumbai, in cooperation with Buzz on Earth, we have conducted 4 cloud chats featuring some of the Swiss multinational companies, the senior executive of Swiss multinational companies. And when we started the series, I briefly explained the main reasons, the 3 main reasons for the series. And these were: the best time for sustainable action is now, and corporates play a crucial role to reach the SDGs. And third, as a leader in innovation, Switzerland is well placed to contribute to sustainable development with expertise and latest technologies. So looking back at the last 4 sessions, I simply like to recall some of the takeaways. Our first session started in September 17 with ABB, the CEO, Managing Director, Mr. Sanjeev Sharma. With him, we learned about the potential eco-friendly impact of the use and integration of advanced technology and engineering. Technologies to reduce the carbon emissions through green energy resources and greener fuels. Also how ABB technology is helping to spread the spread of EV mobility. In short, technology as an enabler for sustainable development. Then we had on October 7, Holcim with the region head of Asia Pacific, Mr. Martin Kriegner. He highlighted some best practices integrated into the cement manufacturing in India and globally, some interesting Holcim initiatives for low carbon concrete, focus on renewable energy, waste heat recovery, dedicated efforts on circular economy, and also the fact that ACC and Ambuja Cement, the 2 Holcim companies in India, have signed the net zero pledge. Then we had Swiss Reinsurance Company on October 28 with Hadi Riachi, CEO, and Gillian Rutherford, from the head reinsuring sustainability from Zurich. There we learned how a reinsurance company is helping businesses to handle severe environmental and social challenges, how Swiss Re is assessing climate-related risks and offers solutions for climate resilience, and actively monitors and manages risks related to ESG by using digital and other advanced technologies. Then finally, on November 17, Nestlé, major food company, with the Director and Corporate Affairs of Corporate Affairs, Sanjay Kachuria. He highlighted how the food company enables a responsible sourcing and supply chain, promotes eco-friendly practices in India by initiatives such as to promote regenerative agriculture practices with local farmer communities, circularity within companies' operations, plastic neutrality and general focus on sustainable packaging, and Nestlé's global goals such as the net zero roadmap until 2050. It will take a huge collective effort to reach the SDGs, as we all know, and the companies presented serve perhaps as role models for the entire industrial sectors. The impact with a large number of business partners, supply chains, stakeholders create a welcome multiplier effect. Perhaps this is how the required collective action can be achieved. Today, in our last session, we will learn how Switzerland engages for sustainable development through our development cooperation. And to complete the series, my colleagues from the Embassy in Delhi will present the various activities of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, SDC, for a climate-compatible development here in India. Thank you very much, Corinne and Jonathan, for joining us today and providing us, hopefully, with some insights about your work. And with that, I'd like to give the floor back to you, Gayatri.
Thank you, Atmar. That was quite an exhaustive summary, and it really touched upon all the good lessons that we have been, compiling from all these conversations in the last couple of months. So just very excited to get started now, because this development cooperation really sits at the intersection of, the impact that is social as well as ecological work that is being done through your global program on climate change and environment. And I believe this is one area where there are a lot of initiatives that are possible in the context of an emerging economy like India. And the current bilateral ties between the two countries have been giving numerous opportunities to do so. So, Corinne, I would probably want to ask you in first place, how did, you have already spent close to half a century. SDC has, that is almost 5 decades in the country. So what kind of progress has been made, and what are the focus areas when it comes to the intervention from SDC side?
Yes, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear Gayatri, dear Otmar, thank you. It's wonderful to be here and have the floor to discuss actually Switzerland's development cooperation, which is not business, but it's government. So it's actually taxpayers' money we're spending. So all the Swiss who pay taxes, that's the money we're spending. And I think, as you also say, it's a collective action. And I'm very pleased, and I also participated in some of the previous sessions where we heard businesses. And I think maybe today we will hear more about, what the government of Switzerland does and how it works also very closely with the government of India. And of course, also with civil society, with the private businesses. I'm so happy to have a few words about that. Gayatri, that's true. The Swiss Development Corporation as such has been in India for the last 60 years. And now everybody out there probably remembers India 60 years back was a very different India. When you look at also the poverty in the country, I think India has made enormous progress over the last 60 years. And with that also, of course, the collaboration between the two countries, between Switzerland and India, has evolved. So when we started Switzerland, it was really based on a friendship between the two countries. We were also one of the countries that had signed a friendship treaty just after India's independence. And it was more based on a humanitarian rationale. It was helping mainly to lift people out of poverty. And most of the actions that the Swiss did was based on what the Swiss best know. And that has a lot to do with agriculture, with livestock, has to do with how do we build houses, and of course also with microfinance, with microinsurance. So maybe the example that most people would remember is the milk production. I'm pretty sure everybody of you knows Amul. And actually the Swiss have supported the production of milk in Kerala by supporting the collection of milk in Kerala, and that's become a very big distribution network in Kerala and then in the country. And I think also what we did is to crossbreed cows, so the Indian cows with Swiss cows, and the result was that there was more milk, more productive. That's very long back. There are many other examples of what we've done, and there is a little book actually, Partners in Development, India and Switzerland. And so for those who are very interested, that's there. But of course, our cooperation today is very different, and India is very different. I also believe Switzerland is very different. And we do have a common challenge, which is climate change, and that's where we focus on today.
Absolutely. So great. So this is what brought me to the second question. That is probably, Jonathan, you may want to take a stab at that. You have come up with this program called Global Program on Climate Change and Environment. So I would love to understand what is the modus operandi for this program, as well as what are the objectives that have been set, given that it is such a vast subject and the number of interventions that you can have is perhaps just too many. So what are the areas that you have chosen to focus on in the near term?
Great, thank you very much, Gayatri. Good evening, everyone. Also very happy and honored to be here and to have this fifth session of Buzz on Earth on Switzerland for sustainability after all these great companies and speakers. Yes, so as Corinne mentioned, SDC is a development agency, originally focusing on South cooperation, on poverty reduction, on humanitarian aid, and that's still what we do in many parts of the world. But at the same time, SDC also works on global issues, namely food security, for instance, water, migration, health, and climate change and environment is also one of them. Since they are global issues, they require a global approach, working through global institutions like UN organization, international organization, general development banks, and international funds. So the global program, Climate Change and Environment, works at the global level. For instance, with the International Energy Agency, it takes part in negotiation of UNFCCC, for instance. It works with the Climate and Clean Air Coalition that India also joined last year, and where India sits is this year as well. So climate and environment is one of these themes. It requires a global and cooperative approach. It requires a global approach and cooperation between different countries, different partners. It's also a question of credibility and scale, because solutions that work in Switzerland are not necessarily solutions that work for the rest of the world as well. So the idea is the global program, Climate Change and Environment, has 3 offices, country offices or regional offices, which are Beijing, Delhi for South Asia, and Lima for Latin America. So all our projects, the project that we run, have both a local dimension and a global dimension. By working in India, you already have a global dimension because of the weight of India. But the idea of this global dimension is to disseminate lessons and successes to other parts of the world. That's what we call the elevator approach. We test, we try, when it works, we disseminate. And this is why we call it a global program. And why climate change and environment? Because here in India, we focus exclusively on climate change. So addressing the causes of climate change, mitigating greenhouse gases, and also adapting to the impacts of climate change, because climate change is happening and we need to adapt to it. And we also work on other environment issues such as water, soil, and air pollution. And the way we operate, first of all, we are aligned with the priorities of the countries where we work. For instance, in India, we are very much aligned with the what we call nationally determined contribution, the engagement, the objective that India took at the last COP26, for instance, that you've heard about. We work with the governments at the central level, but also at the local level. Both India and Switzerland are federal countries. We believe in local action, and that's why we also work with states and cities at the local level. We work in partnership with universities, think tanks, NGOs, private sector, both in India and in Switzerland. So at the moment, we are running 8 large projects. As you mentioned, there are a lot of things that we could do, but we are a small country working in a big country. Somebody recently said Switzerland has skills, India has scale. And I think that sums up everything. India also has skills. That's why we cooperate together. So at the moment, we're working on 8 projects, which are quite targeted, strategically targeted, and we are also working on 2 new ones.
Okay, that's quite interesting. Especially India has scale. That point is really very important, because here I think we are not only and I see that question also coming up in one of the chats, that we are not only one of the most populous countries, but also we are one of the youngest countries in the world. So that also puts us at the forefront when it comes to being the most potent country when it comes to taking the most workload of the global economy. So with that, I would want to ask one more question, Jonathan. That is, in 2006, you actually managed to shift the fundamental approach of cooperation, and you moved towards collaboration. So that was the I would say that was a systemic shift in the way your organization was approaching these issues. So how would you compare the two approaches, and how the impact has been in between the two? What is the difference has been in the impact that is achieved in the two approaches?
Right. Thank you. That's a very interesting question. I think Corinne will be the best person to answer this. But just to mention briefly, I think what we've seen here is a shift of paradigm in all development sector. Projects can only be sustainable if they are, if the country, the stakeholders are in the driving seat and carry them. And I think the other thing that happened also is that the sustainability issue also became, mainstream. It came on stage. And I think it does break down also the dichotomy between developed industrialized countries on one hand and developing countries. In the end, we are all developing and we need to cooperate, learn from each other. Being sustainable, is an objective that every country should share. But I think Corinne is more the specialist on this question and can probably answer in a more detailed and historical way.
Not hysterical, but we've seen development aid being criticized a lot for being top down from developed countries to developing countries. And I think, yes, there was some in the past, probably it was a little bit, top down, maybe not so adapted, but I think Switzerland has always tried to be collaborative with private sector, with the civil society. But I think the paradigm shift is really that we are now facing challenges that we cannot just address with the usual projects or approaches. It's really what we've seen with climate change is that the countries have to work together at the global level, but also at the regional level. And what is very important, that we have really, we're talking to each other at the same height. The countries, there is not a developed and a developing country. Of course, when it comes to negotiation, climate change negotiation, there are always these positions, but we're all sitting in the same boat. We're all sitting in the same boat, and what we have to do in order to reduce the CO2 emissions, or how we can help the people to adapt. It's not that one country has the magic bullet and is better than the other. I think it's together see, and that's what we're trying today, is we want to bring India and Switzerland closer together and discuss what are the critical issues where Switzerland and India have both an interest, and where also India has a very clear demand to us and says, look, this is something we really want to take from you as an experience. And even the Swiss would say, yes, we would like to apply it and learn again. We will come back to that when it comes to mountains. Both of our countries are mountainous countries, and both of us, we know that the climate change is having a tremendous effect on this very fragile ecosystem. So it's not that one is having less problems than the other, but it's how we bring the technologies together. How do we bring the know-how together, and how do we adapt them to the local context? So I think today it's not that Switzerland comes with an idea, just implements it. Today it's really India asking very upfront from Switzerland, this is what we would like to see, and then we have a discussion on where we can bring in the cooperation. So I think it's that very eye-to-eye, very close relationship.
So that's great to know, because the collaborative approach is at the is at the foundation of sustainability, because sustainability as an approach is meant to be collaborative and an integrated way of working together. So I really even like the fact that you're talking about global, regional, and local, which is very important, because just thinking of sustainability as a global problem and not really taking into adherence the local practices and local wisdom and traditional wisdom lying in the places like India, it would be actually leaving apart a lot of important things to be addressed. So that is very interesting. And again, coming to the point that I just made a few minutes back, that India has a large young population, and the development script that the West has taken, that is not the best role model to follow. I think the entire world agrees on that today, that the way the Western countries have developed, that cannot be replicated by the developing countries and emerging economies, because by that logic, we might probably need several more Earths to manage that. So there is a fundamental requirement for the development script to be changed for the developing countries and emerging economies. So what kind of lessons do you think as a developed nation you would like to share, and you think it would be possible for a country like India to not do it this way?
Well, first of all, I think India has always done his own script. So it's not up to the Swiss to explain India what the script should be. Maybe don't repeat the same mistakes that some of us have done. Definitely, you're making the allusion to a very high carbon footprint that we have. And I really hope that India will not follow the same carbon footprint at the capital level. Of course, India today is one of the most the biggest emission countries already. And you're right, if this 1.3 billion people or 1.4 billion people would have the same carbon footprint as in the West, it definitely is a challenge. So yes, that is a challenge, and I think India has taken a very clear stance also at the COP in Glasgow this November, right, by announcing the net zero by 2070. I think now it's the question of how you get there, and we will have more discussion on what technology it needs, also how you get clean energy. I'm sure Jonathan will say something about that. India has to find its ways, and I think if international cooperation can bring in some of lessons learned, maybe some new technologies, and we can share the lessons learned and these new technologies, I think that's where we have the collaboration we need to achieve, to address the challenge. One point maybe, many people see this 1.4 billion people only as a problem, and I just want to say, you also have to see this as a chance. I mean, it's a lot of people. So the projects, of course, have to be much bigger. But if you can make the people work for environmental conservation, environmental protection, imagine if you could take all the youth and all the women, we always forget these 50% of women, if they already do a lot of environmental conservation, but if you can even do that more, it'd be fantastic. I mean, for example, how to rejuvenate springs needs a lot of manpower. And if you find the youth, the men and the women to do that, it would be fantastic, especially in the mountain areas where we see around 60% of the springs being risk of disappearance. So the water that is running out from these springs, it's a huge challenge. But if you get people to work for that, India does have a lot of missions and has a lot of missions that pay for manpower. And one of them is, of course, it is Manrega, where people are paid a salary if they do work. And some of the work and a lot of the, I think it's around 60% is done on environmental conservation. So I think we just have to turn that into an opportunity also to use the people for environmental protection. But I'm sure Jonathan wants to add to that as well.
Yeah, very well said. So yeah, Jonathan, you have something to add to this?
Very little, because Corinne told it all, but
okay, when you got
the very
next question, Jonathan, take the next.
Yeah, thanks. No, it's a very interesting question that you're asking, because I mean, we are in this post. I mean, for the past 20 years, I think this post-development discourse. What came after development, and the way we do development now, the way we think about development is very different from the way we used to think about it. And what was completely forgotten 30, 40 years ago was the environment. It was considered as a kind of, in terms of externalities and so on. Yes. Now it's right in the middle. And we realize that you can't have development, you can't have sustainability without taking into account the environment. And really, not more than taking it into account, you have to make it center stage, because we depend on it. Because we depend on natural resources, because we depend on these environmental services. And then we have to replace it. I take an example, the bees, for instance. Since you're called Birds on Earth, maybe this connects to the name of your organization. But how do you replace that? Do you have to go by hand and pollinize every single flower the way it works? How much will it cost? And so on. So just an example, but that's something that is happening in part of the world. And so I think the way we are thinking now about the environment is very different. The other thing also is that the technologies that we are available now are completely different. The way to develop 100 years ago, 150 years ago was coal, oil, gas was abundant, and we didn't think about where this was going. Today, the cheapest technologies are the renewable energies. And and that's where the investment go. But at the same time, we can't forget also to think about energy efficiency. We have smart technologies, but we have to use them smartly. I take the example of my country. My country has 60%, Switzerland has 60% of electricity coming from the hydroelectric sector. So it's renewable. It used to be 80. At the same time, we still have a high carbon footprint. So you can't, take things in isolation. You have to think, how do we work? How do we use energy more efficiently? For a long time, we've been used to using fossil fuels, considering them as cheap, as abundant and limited, but that's not the case. That's what we're finding out now. So it's very interesting, as Corinne said, that India is choosing its own way, is able to leapfrog in many ways, and can show the example. I mean, we have to work together, we have to work in the same direction. And the example that India is showing in many regards is very, very encouraging. So that was my 2 cents, my 2 pesa on it.
No, very important things. And one thing which very recently came up, I think that was when the ambassador of Switzerland visited the whole notion of, the two countries bringing together their best. So I think digitalization is one area that has been identified as the most important focus areas, right, within the technology domain. So also a lot of role to play when it comes to climate change and climate action. And that also connects with the overall awareness building in the current day and age. As you were saying, you have to pollinize almost every flower as much as possible in order to get this information and knowledge disseminated. So what kind of initiatives or examples are there that you would like to quote? And I'm not just restricting that to digitalization. Maybe that is one thing that is on the top of my head right now. But there are other examples where you would want to quote that the two countries are coming together, and Switzerland, which is really known for its innovation and technologies, especially from the consumable market. What are the examples that you would like to quote that has been injected in India in order to, further prosper the climate action efforts?
So Gayatri, what you not said is Jonathan and I are sharing a job. So I have a couple of projects. Actually, I have 4 and Jonathan has 5. So I will start with my projects. And sure. I definitely digitalization in 2 ways. The first one is when we look at glaciers, and we know that the glaciers are melting extremely fast, and we do have more and more glacier lakes that form, and they can be quite dangerous. They have to be monitored. And in one of our projects in the Indian Himalayas, actually, together with the NDMA, I mean, it's the Indian government, we work on how we can monitor these lakes, and how we can monitor changes also in the lakes, and how do we establish then model and establish early warning. And in order to understand the changes in the cryosphere, in the ice, in the snow cover, quite often we use satellite data. Satellite data can be used to understand the changes, and especially so if you compare them with on-the-ground data. So you can actually triangle the data, and we work very closely with the University of Zurich, with Geotest, also a company in Zurich, and of course then with institutes in India and research institutes and NDMA very closely to really try to predict the changes we see in the Indian Himalayas, and then to design some of the early warning systems and also to model some of the landslides. And I think everybody now listening, we remember the Chamoli event this year, which unfortunately caused again a loss of life. And I think we need to invest more into these early warning systems in the future. The second is we use technology, SARMAP. It's also a Swiss technology which is used globally, and that is it's also a remote sensing technology that you can see changes in the land use, even if it's cloudy, which you cannot when there is only satellite data. Once you have clouds, you don't really see what's happening on there. So we have a technology that you can see that even when there are clouds, and especially in monsoon, we know that the clouds are there. So this technology is very interesting for all the insurance companies. And we have a project, it's called RISE, and it's actually introducing, or has introduced this technology so that the farmers, but especially also the insurance companies, can see after a disaster, after a hailstorm, after a flood, after a heat wave, if the crop is destroyed, normally people have to go on the ground and count the loss. It's very intensive. So it's also to use some of these technologies to verify the changes and the losses that the farmers have endured. So it's some of these technologies we can really make it much faster for the farmers to get the insurance payments, but also to the insurances then to cross-check what really was the loss.
Okay, very interesting. In fact, this technology where you can see through the clouds, that really sounds very interesting in the Indian context, because in places like Bangalore, it is always cloudy.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Jonathan, you may want to quote some more examples?
Yes, I would have many examples. As you see, collaboration here also start at home between Tori and I, who speaks first. But yeah. Yes, I mean, some examples that I would like to give is, for instance, renewable. There are a lot of talks about renewable energies. And for instance, we have a project on renewable energies integration in housing, because these renewable energies have to be integrated from the beginning. So it could be, for instance, it can be, technology to store electricity, to store energy within a building, for instance, that we are trying to introduce. Rooftop, for instance, are pretty high in India. You find them a lot. But when it comes to other renewable energies like wind power or biomethanation or integrated photovoltaic and solar thermal, for instance, that's where we are trying to to experiment, to push to and see if we find also some financial models to model them. So basically, what we do is that the market does a lot. The government takes a lot of this on its own, but we're trying to introduce technologies before they're really taken by the market, to see if it works in the Indian context. One thing that we would love to integrate, for instance, which is very high at the moment, is heat pumps. For instance, heat pumps in Switzerland, which can be used also for cooling. You barely have any house now that has been in Switzerland without a heat pump, whether it's an air pump or a geothermal heat pump. But that's something that we would really like also to test. In Ladakh, for instance, we are also financing some research on passive solar housing, like how using the energy of the sun, not through photovoltaic, but by orienting your building, by choosing the correct windows ratio, insulation, and so on. How do you capture the energy of the sun? And that's something, I'm giving this example. This is a low tech, but it's something that can be very easily implemented, and that mountain people know, because usually they put their house in the right location where when the sun is where you get maximum sun during the day. Another example, for instance, is the field of energy efficiency. We have a project called Buildings Energy Efficiency Project, BEEP. And the idea is that, well, the cheapest energy and the less polluting one is the energy that we don't consume. So if, for instance, you manage to increase energy by 50%, that means the same amount of energy that you have can now be used by twice the amount of people. And it does make a lot of impact. So what we try to do, for instance, is to, in collaboration with Swiss and Indian engineers, to work on the building envelope of buildings. Again, the ratio of windows, the material that you use, and so on. We try to introduce external movable shading system, which are like curtains that you put outside, that are very frequent in some part of the world, less in others. And another tool also that will be presented actually tomorrow by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, the Ministry of Power, is a computational fluid dynamic model, which allows you to maximize the amount of natural cooling that you have, in a block of buildings through natural ventilation, wind, and so on. So these are some of the examples. Can be high tech, can be sometimes low tech. When smart technologies are important, as I mentioned before, but they have to be used smartly. So these are some of the examples. And maybe just another example also is in the regarding clean water, sustainable cities. For instance, we have a project called Capacities Building Project.
I was about to talk about that, the climate.
Okay, so we can keep it for later.
No, not later.
Okay.
You could build upon that.
Maybe one very important innovation. I think if I had to cite only one, and you did have a talk with Lafarge, and you heard about Lafarge and Ambuja talk about low carbon cement. Actually, Switzerland has been, SDC has been funding a project through university in Switzerland, also IIT Delhi, IIT Madras, and an organization called Development Alternative, to develop low carbon cement using the technology of calcined clay to replace some of the clinker that is used in cement. And that has a huge potential. Basically, the idea is to reduce CO2 emissions in the cement sector by up to 30%. When you think that cement is responsible for 8% of CO2 emissions worldwide, that India is the second biggest cement producer and consumer in the world, it represents a huge impact. I mean, worldwide, it's we are aiming at half a gigaton of CO2 emission reduction, basically. So these are some of the examples. There would be others in the cleanup, in the field of air pollution and others. But I think I'll stop here.
So just to bring a perspective of the kind of interventions that SDC has in these technology collaborations, is that SDC provides the technological know-how or the expertise through specific agencies in Switzerland, or it is the monetary grants or funding that it provides? Like, in what all ways does SDC pitch into these projects?
I mean, what we do, of course, do have a budget. It's, I think in the film it was said it's around 6 to 7 million Swiss francs a year. But I think that we're not one of the big ones. We don't provide loans, for example, as other countries do. So when we provide grant money, that means it's free money. So the government, nobody has to pay us back. It's really free. It comes with a package of technical assistance. And this technical assistance is provided by international experts, and often they're Swiss, but they can also be Dutch or something else. And also by the Indian institutes, because we should not forget, India has some of the excellent institutes. So it's always in combination between these. So we do provide money, but then it comes with technical assistance. And also a dialogue at the policy level in terms of what can now be used in India or globally. How can we use these experiences made in India somewhere else in the region?
Got it. And I'm sure that the similar model is being followed with the Smart Cities program in India, where I think your initiative of capacities, I don't know how to pronounce it. Is it capacities or capacities, where you are trying to build in climate resilient cities in the country? So is this model exactly relatable?
Yeah, it is capacities. That's a very good example actually, because this is a collaboration like for the project between Swiss, Swiss and Indian organization and entities. So, I mean, what we do, yes, we do work in cities and states, as I mentioned, in the beginning. And the reason we do that is because, cities account for approximately 2/3 of global energy use, and about the same in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, which drive climate change. So the idea is that, yes, we do, if you want to act on climate change, on mitigation, you have to work with cities. The other thing is that climate change is happening. Nobody can deny it. And cities need to adapt. They already have challenges. You mentioned population, for instance, population growth, movement of population to cities. So the cities are growing and you need to provide basic services. They need to have an infrastructure that is adapted also to this population, and to make sure that, things like, mobility services, water, energy, and so on are provided, education and so on. So the idea is, how do they provide such, how do they adapt, how do they provide such services in a changing climate? So that's a project that actually addresses both adaptation and mitigation needs. What we do is that, well, in collaboration with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, the National Institute of Urban Affairs, and with Swiss international organization, we designed this project called Capacities, which aims at enhancing capacities and knowledge of governments to access finance and scale up urban climate action for climate. So we work in 2 states, which are Tamil Nadu and Gujarat, and within these 2 states, 8 cities. The idea is that cities design, first of all, the climate resilient city action plans. Based on that, they allocate budget, they implement the action plans, and in the end, they measure results. The idea is, based on these plans also, they learn how to prioritize actions in areas of intervention. Some areas need more intervention than others, and that's what they do, to allocate the resources. The project is based on a basket of solutions. So they implement pilot intervention in the field of energy, transport, waste management, wastewater management, and biodiversity, essentially. And examples are like, grid-connected solar PV systems for water utilities or for social housing, biomethanation plants, decentralized compost facilities for processing biodegradable waste, dense urban forest, groundwater recharge. Water logging is a big issue, and it's becoming even more with climate change, with heavy, intense weather events. Waste water treatment plants, I mentioned that, I think, and so on. So cities receive technical assistance and funds from both Swiss and Indian experts. Cities also have to identify sources of funding, which can be from public, but also from private, from the private sector. And they create bankable projects. So the methodologies then, which are elaborated at the state level, are then disseminated through states and through central institutions. But what is very important in capacities is that when cities are actors of their own development, we talked about this collaborative approach, and it's us cities who make their plans and adapt. And they invest in their future. They have to build this infrastructure, but they build it for the future, keeping climate change in mind, in a way that is less carbon intensive and also climate resilient.
So just to, ask one last question, unless maybe Corinne, you want to add something to what Jonathan just said?
No, I think there are fantastic questions in the chat. So if we have a few minutes,
absolutely. So
they deserve being answered.
Yes, definitely. So that is what I wanted to request. So just one question before we get onto the Q&A from the audiences. What is the percentage of budget and the focus on the conservation and biodiversity side of projects?
How much would the budget be for the
I'm just saying in percentage wise, not exactly quantum, but what is the focus? Basically, I want to know, because conservation is a different area where you're trying to regenerate, right? Sustainability projects is one thing, and conservation and regeneration projects are a different ballgame altogether. So what is the focus on that front?
So it's right that we have the climate in general, and then we have a very specific one on environmental protection. And there, I mean, I cannot say in terms of money, but in terms of the project, really, and that's answering one of the questions in the chat, by the way, we do have a project on clean air. Clean air, of course, is a climate change issue. At the same time, it also has very important health issues and it has environmental issues. So there we have one. And I think also we have some smaller projects. One was on COVID. We had a wastewater study on COVID. And we are looking also to enter the domain of how can we support India in terms of reforestation. But it's true that this is a little smaller one. I think probably the most important one is the Clean Air Project. Jonathan, there was a question. Maybe do you want to say a few words about that? Because that's becoming globally an issue.
No, just to answer this, biodiversity, we touch upon it through capacities. We are also working on shifting. For instance, we have a new project coming also. Can we tell about it now? I think we need to wait a little bit. So we can't. But which touches more upon, which will touch more about biodiversity. We are not really into environmental conservation per se. I think some other donors are much more focused on it. As a small country and a small donor, we really have to choose carefully where our added value can be, where we think we can have an impact, where there is a request also to work on it. So I think other organizations are much more active on these fronts that we. Probably, I mean, we would love to do more. We would love to act also in other fields, but we also have to be realistic on what we can do with the resources we have and where the demand is. So I can't really put a percentage of biodiversity. What is sure is that we never do anything against biodiversity, because that's really important and that's a focus. But we try to integrate it as much as possible, but more as a as a secondary, as Corinne mentioned, our focus is really climate change, adaptation and mitigation.
All right, great. So now if I'm allowed, may I take questions from the audiences?
And I've seen there are already some questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, I can. Should I read them out or
maybe
I can, because I can't see them.
You go on Q&A.
Okay, I can read them out, Jonathan. Don't worry.
Thank you.
So, the first question I cannot read. It is in a different language. But Mahendra Chilukari is asking, India needs to develop through community projects. Okay, that's not a question, that's a comment. Then Captain Tapas Majumdar is saying, does the Swiss government mandates or encourages Swiss companies and investors to seek the sustainability reporting criteria for investment or partnership purpose?
So maybe just because I take the one that was a comment on the community one, because the other one is also there. I think it's very important that we do not forget, yes, technologies are important, but you always have to work with the communities. Yes. So for example, in the Indian Himalayas, if you don't have community awareness, that you don't work at the community level, you can do all the data, whatever you want, but I think it always has to be a mixed. And I would agree that we have to really look at the community and not think of community as backwards. But communities do have a lot of knowledge, and we have to preserve that knowledge and to keep it. Very important. The other one, does the Swiss government encourages Swiss companies and investors to seek the sustainability reporting criteria for investment? I'm not working in terms of investment here. I just believe Switzerland, of course, has a very clear agenda in terms of sustainability. I believe that the companies inherently do have an interest to do that. because it also allows them to have and develop new business models and to find new investments. I think these days we will have very few companies or even investors that will invest in energies that aren't renewable. So I always believe, I'm coming from a liberal country where I believe that the businesses are at the forefront. And as we see the world going on, I think the investment into sustainable development, into clean energies is the way forward. And we've seen a lot of good, and Otmar already cited, some of the big companies have realized that that's the way they want to go. And we see that in terms of the government, we do not have mandate that they should do it, but of course we do encourage, but it's something maybe Otmar wants to add at the end. Yeah. And
another question, if I may read that, it is from Mr. R.K. Gautam. In any developing nation like India, especially where there is pressure on land for agriculture, it is a forest that always take the cut and rapidly lose their cover. With a third of Switzerland geography being forest, how do you manage to safeguard and even increase the forest cover from agricultural invasion? That's a wonderful question.
That's the magic bullet question. Forests have been degraded, and also in Switzerland, I must say, there we see lots of countries having challenges to actually and keep their forest cover. There is no magic bullet, but I think I want to come back to what I said. You need to involve the communities. The communities need to see a value in keeping these trees. So if you allow the communities to make a living, because it's conservation that goes hand in hand with having an income. If the people gain an income from certain trees or certain cultivations without cutting down the trees, I believe the people would not cut them. So I think it's that one that you have to find ways of, for example, one is when you have this shifting landscape, the shifting landscape, you could have trees and cultivation at the same time. So you have to balance these. The other thing is, of course, when you have the pressure from the population, and there is how you need a very good planning. I think that comes with the planning of urbanization, is how would you plan? And you have to plan your cities, even at the smaller level, bigger level, taking into account not just the city, but the forest as well. So you have actually a planning, an urban planning at the landscape level. This is something I think if sir, you have the magic bullet, I mean, most of the people will be there. I think we need more investment in terms of money, in terms of resources, but also people. This has to, the forest one has to be a priority, I believe.
Just to add on this, I mean, it's a bit weird to address this question in a country that has so many specialists. I'm a big fan of Untitled Woods and Ramchandra Gua. And
yes.
All the work that has been done in the Uttarakhand and on the Chipko movement and so on. But I mean, when it comes to Switzerland, I think we have a very strict legal framework to protect forests, and even to protect. You can't just cut a tree. Usually, when our neighbors just cut six trees that were more than 100 years old, and we are still coping with the grief of it and trying to see how to address that. But normally, you can't cut trees like that. Trees are protected, and you need a good reason and to ask for an authorization to do that. And I think we need to evaluate the situation. There are quite a few countries in the world that had to struggle with deforestation, high rate of deforestation, and did manage to reverse that. The best example is actually Japan. Dominican Republic, for instance, there's a fantastic book called Collapse, which are really by Dry Diamond, that few chapters that deal with it, to see how some countries manage to reverse it. Yes, Switzerland has forests that are growing. The area on the forest actually is growing, but I think it comes with a very strong legal framework that protects the forest. My hope also is that, India has taken a strong commitment to carbon sinks as well, with this 3 gigaton of carbon sinks. And that should come with a stronger, protection of existing forest and the commitment to create new forests as well. But yeah.
We are also actually, as an organization, the sister organization of Buzz on Earth, that is Gaia the Earth Foundation. We are actually vested into growing close to 100,000 acres in next 5 years as a reforestation activity for India, just to create the carbon sinks as well as the livelihood opportunities for the farmers and communities. So yeah, all for that. Okay.
And I think I just see the second question is about water.
Yes.
And if you allow me, I think we should make the linkage between forest and carbon sinks and water.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because what we see is probably the reforestation has to be done in areas where we see the water winding. Correct. Because of course with tree cover, we can keep the soil moisture, we can keep also certain air moisture. So I think if the different actors see a linkage between keeping the water and the trees, and I know water is extremely important for agriculture as well, then we may find a balance. There are different models, of course, to do that, but I think the water issue is one that Switzerland does have quite a lot of experience as well. Of course, we are abandoned, as the person says, the water tower of Europe, but even in Switzerland, we've seen over the last years the flow of rivers been changing. I mean, less precipitation at certain moments in time. So we also face some of the shortages, especially in summer already. And yes, we do have certain activities here in India, especially on springs in the mountains. And here we work very closely with Niti Aayog, which is the planning commission of India. Actually, this Monday, we just, Niti Aayog just released a resource book on how we rejuvenate springs, and SCC was contributing. So I think let's keep water and forests together and see how we can all of us do more on these two important points.
All right, great. The next question is from anonymous attendee. What is the point of agricultural related sustainable progressions, especially related to organic and natural farming activity? We are an agri-based biotech startup. We are working on circular economy, agro-nutrient product development research. How can we make a collaboration to extend our research activities with Swiss institutes?
Jonathan, when you take that now, we have a very exclusive focus on climate change, and we do also have we've had in the past some projects on food security, so really on agriculture. Now these days we have less of these projects because there is a different global program on food security that we have. So we are not so much in organic and natural farming anymore, although I know that Swiss companies have had a lot of exchanges also with India. And for example, in the basmati rice, the organic basmati rice, where there was a collaboration and there was also SDC funding. So yes, these are definitely important topics, and natural farming. It's just not where we at present do have the major of these projects, but I know many other development partners do invest, and I know a lot of businesses. It's a big business here. I wish you all the best. Please continue looking for collaborations in this field.
Okay. The next question is from Mr. Paritosh Segal. How does SDC engage with not-for-profits in India, working with children in villages, generating awareness and providing experiential learning to address areas of environment and climate change?
John, you want this?
Yes. So what we do, we do have some projects on raising awareness. And the best example is actually regarding air pollution. The project we run on air pollution works on monitoring of air pollution to understand the sources of pollution. It works on the clean air plans with cities. And then the third one, because it's very important, if we want change to happen, the level of awareness has to increase. People have to support change. They have to ask for change. And therefore, we do work with schools, with universities, with the media to raise awareness. So that's one of the ways, but it's very specific. What is important to say is that, again, we have to, we are running these 8 or 9 projects at the moment, which are rather large projects, and we don't necessarily go for a, case by case. So we do work with some NGOs within these projects. For instance, Terry is a very important partner for us, and there are others. But it's not necessarily that we can support like individual progress like this. But we are happy also to to discuss and give also some advice or information on who could be interested.
Okay. So there's one more question from Anna Grossino. Good evening, greetings from the UK, and thank you for such great work you're involved with. I have done extensive work in India, funded by the EU, supporting the India government to draft their national air quality strategy and local action plans. Question: how does your work and projects bank on the synergies between actions to reduce climate change and air pollution? In the UK this year, for the first time in our history, we have had a court case stating air pollution as a cause of death in the death certificate, the Ella case. So maybe the clean air project you may want to talk about that I think we briefly touched upon.
Yeah. Yes. So that's one example. I mean, what we do is that we do align with the national clean air policy. We do work in 4 non-attainment cities. We do work on awareness raising, and of course, we do follow quite closely what's happening also in other parts of the world, in other cities. And yes, that was a landmark. Absolutely, that was a landmark judgment. Very important. We did discuss that when it happened, and I think that's the thing that does contribute to raising awareness. I mean, on the one hand, this last month has been very sad for looking at the air quality in Delhi, basically since the beginning of November. And not seeing much improvement. At the same time, what gives me a lot of hope is actually the amount of articles, the amount of awareness that we saw in the press, and people asking for change, and government being accountable, so having to show some accountability on that. And I think we see more and more engagement. I think that's very this is very encouraging to see.
Okay. There's one more question. Is there any intervention under the smart city domain, like smart water, sustainable stormwater, or nature-based solutions for environmental issues in the cities, or the cutting-edge research on bringing the IoT and spatial technologies?
So I'm trying to see yes, I mean, we do. Again, I think that's one thing that we address in I'm trying to find the question. Okay.
Ashwini Kumar,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, what am I, yeah. Yes, we do work in capacities, we work in 8 cities, as I mentioned. Some of them are smart cities, like for instance, the city of Coimbatore, and some are not. So we have a bit of a mix. But yes, dealing with stormwater, for instance, is one of the priorities for some of the cities. The thing is that, I mean, we don't have a one-fit-all solution. We do really work cities by cities, and cities develop their own plan. And it's very different whether it's in Gujarat, whether it's the city of Rajkot, Ahmedabad, or whether it's Coimbatore or Trichy. So all of them have to deal with their own impact of climate change, their all challenges, all priorities, and do act accordingly. But we do deal with this aspect. Yeah.
Okay. There are a lot of questions in the chat section also.
Can I just take one which I found fantastic? I mean,
yes, please.
how do we make responsible students? This is such an important question. It's basically asking, how do we make responsible children, basically the next generation, so that they, that we also have them on board. It says, so we could check these problems before they look in this horrible condition, as if Delhi itself, schools are closed for students for more than 15 days and year situations going to the worst. So I believe, yes, schools are one of the very important entry points when it comes to having a discussion with the students on what world, what environment they want to live in. And I fully agree, COVID has had a very difficult impact on the school in India, but globally. And of course, also the pollution now have had a very difficult impact. But just one thing I was thinking, we cannot just leave it to the schools, honestly. Maybe it's too late already. So I really think that the parents do have a role to play to educate their children in a way that they would want to see the world. So it's really to the parents, to the mothers, to the fathers, the grandparents, to have that discussion at home. Maybe that's the way forward. Government, of course, has a role to play, but maybe we have not discussed enough that we as parents, and I have 2 children at home, it's sometimes a difficult discussion, because they point at us and they tell us, but you're going home now, you take the plane. Why do you take the plane? Sometimes I don't want them to interfere in my choices, but I think that's something all of us can maybe do a little bit more. And I will start tonight with my own children, take up this difficult discussion.
Gaurav, just to answer your question and also to build upon the points, wonderful points made by Corinne, at Gaia the Earth Foundation, we have a program for young people. It is called India Model United Nations, India MUN, and it is actually serving to unite India's young people for climate action. So we are actually providing a platform that will nurture their innate creativity, their deliberating skills, their debating skills. So they are not just equipped with the technological know-how. And for that, we have partnered with organizations like Google and EarthHack, where through hackathons, gamification, and satellite imagery, they are made to understand these concepts on climate. And then we also are, seeking a partnership with Atal Innovation Mission, so that through nurturing that innovation mindset right at an early age, they can think of solutions and not just be the part of, the overall problem equation. So the conditions, COVID that has presented, I think that is just the beginning. We are ought to face something more difficult given the climate change issues that are ought to come yet. But if our children are going to lead from the front, there is definitely some hope that we have. And definitely I'm for this question. How can we make our students and children more responsible and more equipped to fight these problems? So great. Then we have a few more questions. Corinne, do we have enough energy and time to take those? I would just go by your preference.
Yes, of course. It's a pleasure. I was just thinking there is one from Atar Salim on the EV is the new technology which is growing fast. So is electric vehicle. And he's saying this is growing fast across the world, and we are engineering a company is interested in the EV project business if we get some good projects from Swiss companies. So Jonathan, I was just thinking, we have not talked about electric vehicle.
Yes.
And I think when we talk about, that's an important issue, not just for air pollution, but actually clean energy. So do you want to say a few words? Because that's a field we are entering.
I'd love to. Yes. So electric mobility is taking at the moment, I think 50% of our time, because we are working at this new project that we want to launch within the next 6 months. And for us, e-mobility is happening in India. It's growing. We see more and more vehicles, whether it's 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, cars, buses, all over India. It's moving really fast. See a lot of positive development. But it's thought, okay, what can we do here? What is, how can we bring something? And we came with the conclusion that if there are 2 things that we can do, is first, how do we make sure that these e-vehicles are going to be fed with clean energy, with renewable energy. The fact that what is important is that they don't increase the need for for energy that is coming from thermal power plants, from coal burning, basically, because then the impact would be negative in terms of air pollution, in terms of CO2 emission and so on. So that's one aspect we're trying to work on. If you do have some solution on that, we are very interested. The second one also is with the growing number of e-vehicles and the growing number of batteries that go with it. What is planned, for these batteries once they cannot be used for e-vehicle, for instance? Can we still use them for some other purposes to store energy? Maybe they're not used for for mobility, because you need some very well-functioning batteries, but if they work at 70% of the capacity or 80%, you can still use for other purposes. And then what comes afterwards? Are they recycled? We know that on the one hand, there is a shortage of material for batteries worldwide. Not yet, but with the projected increase in e-mobility, they will soon be. We need this material to be recycled, and this material, this heavy metal, lithium, and so on, can also be detrimental for the environment if they are not properly disposed of, if they are not recycled, if they end up in landfills. So these are the two main aspects that we want to work on: how to link e-mobility to renewable energies, and second, how to integrate to make sure that e-vehicle batteries and so on enter a kind of circular economy cycle. So that's the idea, and we'll come with a new project on that. We're not alone. We will be working with some other partners, but of course we are interested in innovation, in innovative solutions, and really interested to discuss these aspects.
Okay, great. We have one more question that is about, is Switzerland interested in coastal biodiversity conservation for ecological sustainability?
I must say, Switzerland being a landlocked country, we are not very knowledgeable about coasts. So I know it's a very important topic, but I believe there are other countries who have much more experience than that. So we have not entered the coastal here. We really here mainly looking at the Himalayas, but we also do have quite a few initiatives in the plains, but not at the coast. Jonathan, maybe from your city point of view, is there a coast in it somewhere?
We are working with Chennai, but that's on the state climate action plan. So we don't really, so far we haven't worked on it. As Corinne said, I mean, we really try to focus where we can bring something. When it goes to coastal areas, some countries are much more experienced, have much more know-how, much more expertise to bring, and usually, countries like Norway, I know that Norway and some other Scandinavian countries are quite active on it. So we really try to focus again, being a relatively small agency with limited resources, really try to focus where we can bring something. But that's a hugely important topic, and we are very glad that, that this question came, that some others are working on it.
Okay, just taking the last question for the evening. Is it possible that SDC can introduce small research projects, IITs and other Indian universities, maybe they say with IITs and other Indian universities, on evaluating the regional contribution in sustainable development, as well as the possibilities in the region? This will probably serve to engage young minds into the field.
Yes, we do have already research projects in IIT Delhi, IIT Madras, in several other universities, and I think I think maybe it's important when we talk about sustainability, it's becoming a little bit of a buzzword in a sense, it's like big. So I think we have to be very clearly define what we're looking at. If we look at certain aspects of adaptation in the mountains, and then you look for the right institutions that we need research collaborations, or if you look at the cement production, then you look at the collaboration. I think we need to look into very specific issues and then to identify the right institutions on the Indian side and on the Swiss side. But yes, it's very important to look at this collaboration in India, but also at the regional level. And I want to cite one last project. Sorry, there were 8, and maybe Jonathan and I managed to put all of them in this conversation, so to all blur you because there's so many. But there is one very important one, and that is the research on solar energy. Solar energy is one of the cleanest technologies you can have, and India is one of the leading countries. Solar energy today is the cheapest in India, and it's actually comparably cheap, even cheaper than fuel. So I think solar is one of the ways ahead. Now, we, SDC, together with IMVI, it's an institution, an international research institution on water. We are looking and funding research into important questions you have to ask. For example, who is benefiting from the solar? What different models are working where? Does solar pumping with the pumps, does this have an effect on the groundwater? And if so, yes, what can you do? Can you connect solar pumps to the grid so that the farmers not only can use the pumps, but he can actually get an income from connecting his solar pump and solar panel to the grid and sell the electricity? These are important research questions one has to answer for the future promotion of solar energy. And here we work not just in India, we also work in Bangladesh, we work in Nepal, and we work in Pakistan. And at a technical level, the findings are exchanged. And I think this is important because you can then share among different countries what is functioning in Nepal may not be functioning in India, but Nepal may want to learn from India. So very important that you keep these research institutions connected and government institutions, technical institutions connected.
All right. Thank you so much, Corinne. You seem to be totally energized with the questions and not at all tired at all. And Jonathan, thank you so much for all the responses. And both of you were extremely patient and extremely well-versed with the responses. Othmar, I would request you to deliver your closing remarks now. I'm sure that you must be waiting for this. We had a very long discussion today. So over to you, please.
Well, of course, I enjoyed very much the discussion, and I just keep my fingers crossed that my internet line will keep until the end. I had some problems in between. Well, the animated discussion today showed the importance of the topic and also the very many aspects it has. And one aspect that, for instance, we have not even looked at so far is also the importance of sustainability in the financial sector. Switzerland, for instance, is determined to make our quite important Swiss financial center a leader in the field of green finance. And it's also already quite gratifying also to see that more and more funds are allocated to ESG funds, sustainable and green investments. And personally, I see here an enormous potential. And of course, these funds will strongly promote also and support sustainable development. Yeah, well, ladies and gentlemen, I just like to thank everyone today for the interest and the participation in our cloud chats. I hope that we were able, or you were able, the speakers here, to provide interesting new aspects, inspiring takeaways also. The sustainability topic affects us all, of course, and the importance will grow further. The recent Glasgow conference showed also that the global community still has a long way to go. But personally, I believe that there are encouraging developments we heard today, for instance, in the field of renewable energy or eco-friendly legislation, also that in many countries were practically unthinkable 10, 15 years ago. So there is reason for hope. And I like to just simply thank all the colleagues today, Corinne and Jonathan from our embassy in New Delhi, for the chat. Those who would like to know more about the SDC work, You will also find more information on the Swiss Embassy's website. A big thank you to you, Gayatri, for the excellent moderations, not only today, but also in the previous chats. You're a sustainability expert, and I would also request everyone to keep following the regular talks and news on your platform, on the platform of Buzz on Earth. And let me also thank Kaisin Sadri from Buzz on Earth and my colleague Maitri Shirokar for the great contribution in the background. And last but not least, a big thank you also to the sponsors of the SwissIT initiative for the financial support for this series. And from my side, with that, I would like to close and wish everyone a very nice evening. Thank you for joining.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Atman.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Take
Thank you
care.
so much.
Thank you so much. Bye. Thank you, Corinne. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Looking forward to staying in touch.
Yes, stay in touch. Good luck. All the best.
Bye-bye.